The moment that changed everything. A life of success, a soul of emptiness. The golden afternoon sun bathed the city in a warm glow as Ethan Caldwell sat in the back seat of his luxury car, staring blankly out the window. The streets of Madrid buzzed with life. People rushing to and from work, street vendors calling out to passers-by, children laughing as they ran alongside their parents. But for Ethan, it was just another day. Another day of meetings, investments, and signing million-dollar deals. Another day where he would return to his penthouse, eat a meal prepared by his personal chef, and sleep in a bed that felt colder than the marble floors beneath it. At 39 years old, Ethan had everything a man could dream of. Wealth, power, status. He was the CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in Spain, a self-made millionaire who had built his empire from the ground up. His name carried weight in the corporate world. And yet, something was missing. The women he met were fascinated by his bank account, not by him. The lavish parties, the expensive cars, the elite clubs, it had all started to feel empty. Lately, he had found himself longing for something real, something money couldn't buy. He sighed, rubbing his temple as his driver maneuvered through the busy streets. That's when it happened. A chance encounter at the crosswalk. The car slowed to a stop at a pedestrian crossing. Ethan barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere. But then, something caught his eye. A young woman was walking across the street, holding hands with 4 small children. They looked between 5 and 8 years old. It should have been an ordinary sight, but it wasn't. Because the moment Ethan's eyes landed on the children's faces, his entire body froze. His breath caught in his throat. His heartbeat quickened. They looked just like him. Not just a little bit. The resemblance was uncanny. Same golden brown hair, same sharp jawline, same deep, piercing blue eyes. His grip tightened on the leather seat. He blinked, convincing himself it was just a trick of the light. But when the children turned toward the street, toward him, his stomach twisted into a knot. It was like looking at his own childhood reflection. What the? The honking of a car behind him startled him back to reality. The light had turned green. His driver, noticing his distraction, glanced in the rearview mirror. Everything all right, Mr. Caldwell? Ethan barely heard him. He couldn't let this moment slip away. Pull over. Now. The driver hesitated. Sir. I said pull over. Without waiting for an answer, Ethan flung the door open before the car had even come to a complete stop. The woman and the children were just about to turn the corner. Ethan ran. The first confrontation. He caught up just as the woman was about to disappear down a quiet side street. Excuse me, Ethan called out, breathless. The woman stiffened. Slowly, she turned around, her expression a mixture of worry and confusion. She was young, probably in her early 30s. She had soft brown hair, tired eyes, and an air of quiet resilience. She wasn't wealthy. Her clothes were simple, and the way she carried herself told Ethan she had been through a lot. Her protective instinct kicked in immediately. She stepped slightly in front of the children, shielding them with her arms. Can I help you? She asked cautiously. Ethan's gaze never left the kids. They were watching him with curious eyes, unaware of the earthquake shaking inside his chest. He swallowed, his voice steady but urgent. Who is their father? The woman's face hardened instantly. That's none of your business. Her voice was firm, her grip on the children's hands tightening. Ethan felt a surge of frustration, but also something deeper. Fear. Because deep down, he already knew. His gaze shifted between her and the children. They look like me, he said, his voice quieter now. You see it too, don't you? For a split second, something flickered in the woman's expression, something she tried to hide. But she couldn't, because it was obvious. And that was the moment Ethan knew this wasn't a coincidence, a past decision resurfacing. The woman hesitated, as if weighing whether to run or answer. Finally, she exhaled sharply. "Look," she said, her voice softer but still guarded. "I don't know who you are or what you want, but these children are mine. They don't have a father." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not true." She flinched. "I don't have siblings," Ethan continued, "and I know for a fact I don't have long-lost cousins." He exhaled, his mind racing. "But there is one possibility." The woman's eyes widened slightly, as if she already knew what he was going to say. "Were you at a fertility clinic in Moscow 6 years ago?" The color drained from her face. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Ethan felt the world shift beneath him. Oh God! It was true. The truth no one expected. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, then nodded. "Yes," she whispered. Ethan staggered backward, feeling like he had just been punched in the chest. It all made sense now. Years ago, when he had just begun his company and was struggling to keep it afloat, he had been in a financial crisis. Desperate for extra cash, he had agreed to be a donor at a fertility clinic under a strict contract. It was supposed to be one-time use, for one woman only. He had never thought about it again. Until now. Until he was standing face to face with 4 children who carried his DNA. A decision that would change everything. Ethan dragged a hand down his face, trying to process the enormity of what was happening. 4 kids. His kids. His gaze flickered back to the woman, who was now watching him with a mix of fear and something else. Sadness. She had tried to raise them alone. She had never planned for him to know. But now he did. And there was no going back. Ethan swallowed hard and did something he never thought he would. He softened. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "But I do know one thing. I can't walk away from this." For the first time, she didn't argue. Because deep down, she had always known. One day, the truth would find them. And now, it had. A truth that couldn't be ignored. Ethan stood frozen, his thoughts colliding like a violent storm. The weight of 4 innocent lives now rested heavily on his shoulders, and for the first time in his life, he had no plan. His entire world, built on logic, business, and control, had just been turned upside down by a single moment at a crosswalk. He looked at the woman standing before him, shielding the children as though she expected him to take them away from her. He wasn't here to do that. He didn't even know why he was still standing here. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was fate. All he knew was that he couldn't walk away. A mother's fierce protection. The woman, Jessica, as he would later learn, kept her body slightly angled between him and the children. Her face was unreadable, but Ethan could see the protective fire in her eyes. She was ready to fight him, to protect them. And that hit Ethan in a way he wasn't prepared for. "I'm not here to hurt you," he finally said, keeping his voice calm. "Or them." Jessica didn't relax. "They're mine," she said, her voice firm but quiet. "I don't need anything from you." Ethan exhaled sharply. "I don't doubt that." He studied her for a moment. She wasn't rich. Her clothes were clean but well-worn. The bags under her eyes told him that she was exhausted, likely from working tirelessly to take care of 4 children alone. And yet she stood her ground. Jessica wasn't looking at him like a woman who needed help. She was looking at him like a woman who had already survived without it. But Ethan wasn't looking for an excuse to walk away. "Look," he said carefully, "I know this is unexpected." Jessica let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "Unexpected? No, Mr. Caldwell, a rainstorm on a sunny day is unexpected. This is like watching a ghost from my past walk straight into my life." She glanced at the kids, who were watching them both in confusion. Jessica's expression hardened. "I never planned on telling them about you," she admitted, "and I'm not sure I want to now." Ethan's stomach twisted. There was something about her words, the finality of them, that unsettled him. He had spent his entire life avoiding emotional entanglements. He had never wanted children, never even considered the idea. But now, Now 4 of them were staring at him with his own eyes, and he had no idea what to do with that. A choice he never expected to make. Jessica sighed, her grip on the smallest child tightening slightly. "I appreciate your concern," she said, "but we've been fine without you. We will continue to be fine." Ethan felt something deep inside him flare with resistance. Fine. She thought they could just part ways now, as if nothing had happened. As if he hadn't just stumbled into the biggest revelation of his life. He took a slow breath. Maybe that was true before today. Jessica's expression darkened. "But now that I know," Ethan continued, "I can't pretend that they don't exist." Jessica clenched her jaw. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to know them," Ethan said, surprising even himself with how sure he sounded. "I want to be in their lives." Jessica's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the first time since this conversation began, she looked genuinely speechless. The unspoken battle. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Ethan didn't know what he had expected her to say. Maybe she would fight him on this. Maybe she would tell him to stay away. But Jessica only looked at him, her face betraying a mix of fear, doubt, and something else. Hope. She didn't trust him, and he didn't blame her. A man like him, appearing out of nowhere, claiming he suddenly wanted to be involved. It probably sounded like a joke, a cruel one. Jessica shifted slightly, adjusting her grip on the small boy beside her. The child, one of the twins, leaned into her instinctively. Ethan felt an unexpected pang in his chest. He had never thought about fatherhood before. Never cared to. But now, looking at these 4 children, his children, he couldn't ignore the way something inside him was changing. They were his blood, and he couldn't just walk away. A reluctant agreement. Jessica let out a slow breath. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, her voice quieter now. Ethan nodded. "I wouldn't trust me either." That earned him a slight tilt of her head, as if she wasn't sure whether to be amused or annoyed. "I don't expect you to let me in overnight," he continued, "but I'm not going to disappear either." Jessica frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I want to spend time with them," Ethan said. "And I want you to let me." Jessica's fingers tightened around her son's hand. She wasn't ready. But at the same time, she wasn't saying no. She was thinking about it, weighing her options. "Meet us for coffee tomorrow," she finally said, reluctantly. "We'll talk." Ethan exhaled in relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A restless night. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the moment at the crosswalk, the moment everything changed. He had lived a structured, predictable life, a life where money solved most problems. But now, money couldn't fix this, couldn't buy what he had just found. 4 children, 4 lives he had unknowingly helped create, and for the first time in his life, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was the missing piece he had been searching for all along. The first step into the unknown. The night had been long, restless. Ethan had tossed and turned in bed, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, his thoughts spinning in a direction he never anticipated. He had spent years building his empire, mastering the art of business, and accumulating wealth that most could only dream of. And yet, he had never been as nervous as he was right now. A coffee meeting. That's all it was. And yet it felt like he was standing at the edge of something life-altering. The woman, Jessica, wasn't convinced about him. That much was obvious. She had every right to be skeptical. He had been nothing more than a name on a piece of paper 6 years ago. And now, suddenly, he had appeared in their lives. And the children, his children, what were they thinking? Did they see him as a stranger? Or did they sense something deeper? Ethan ran a hand through his hair and took a deep breath. It was time. A meeting with the past. The cafe Jessica had chosen wasn't a luxurious spot. It was small, cozy, a family-friendly place with a warm atmosphere. Ethan wasn't used to places like this. His meetings were usually in high-end lounges, where business deals were sealed over fine whiskey and expensive cigars. But this wasn't business. This was something else entirely. As he stepped inside, his eyes scanned the space until they landed on her. Jessica sat at a booth near the window, her back straight, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee as though it was her only source of warmth. And beside her, 4 small figures. The children sat quietly, each holding a cup of hot chocolate. The youngest twin, a boy, was stirring his drink absent-mindedly, while his sister watched him, her head tilted slightly. The oldest girl had her hands wrapped around her cup, her eyes flickering toward Jessica every few seconds, as if trying to read her mother's emotions. And then there was the boy sitting beside her. He wasn't drinking his hot chocolate. He was watching Ethan, studying him. Ethan hesitated for the briefest moment before approaching the table. Jessica glanced up, her expression unreadable. "You're on time." Ethan exhaled softly and nodded. "Yeah." An awkward silence hung between them before she gestured to the seat across from her. "Sit." A stranger, a father. Ethan slid into the booth, suddenly feeling like he was under a microscope. The children, his children, stared at him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Jessica cleared her throat. "So," she began, "this is Ethan." She said his name like it was foreign, something she wasn't sure belonged in her world. The kids didn't say anything at first. Then the oldest, the girl with deep blue eyes identical to his, spoke. "Are you my dad?" Ethan froze. Jessica inhaled sharply. "Emma." "No, it's okay," Ethan interrupted, his voice calm. He turned his gaze toward Emma, the child who had just shattered the tension in one sentence. He didn't know how to answer. Technically, yes. But was fatherhood just a matter of biology? He exhaled. "I don't know if I'm ready to be called that yet," he admitted honestly. "But I do know that I want to get to know you." Emma studied him carefully. The youngest twin, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "But why?" Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the blunt question. The boy's voice was small but strong, his tiny fingers curled around the edge of his cup. "Why now?" Ethan didn't have a perfect answer. He could tell them about the shock of seeing them on the street, about how everything changed the moment he saw their faces. But none of that would be enough. Because at the end of the day, the truth was simple. "I didn't know you existed," Ethan said softly. "Not until yesterday." The boy's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mom said we don't need a dad." Ethan swallowed. Maybe she's right. Jessica flinched at his words. But Ethan continued, his voice steady. "Maybe you don't need a dad, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve to have one." The table fell silent. Jessica's expression softened just a little, and Emma, after a long pause, simply said, "I want to know more about you." Jessica exhaled, shaking her head. "Emma." "No, Mom," Emma said firmly. "I want to know." Jessica looked at her daughter for a long moment, then turned to Ethan. "This is your chance," she said quietly. "But don't mess this up." Stories over hot chocolate. Ethan didn't know when it happened, but eventually, the table no longer felt so tense. The kids started talking. They asked him about his job, about where he lived, about what he did for fun. They were curious, hesitant, but interested. He told them about his childhood, about how he started his company, about the places he had traveled to. And then, somehow, he ended up telling them about the time he burned a pot of ramen so badly that his apartment smelled like smoke for a week. The youngest boy giggled. Ethan blinked. The sound was so small, so pure, so unexpected. And suddenly, it was real. This wasn't a business meeting. This wasn't about contracts or negotiations. This was his life. And these were his children. An agreement, a new beginning. After an hour, Jessica finally glanced at the clock. "We should go." The children groaned, but she gave them a look that made them quickly quiet down. Ethan felt something unfamiliar inside his chest, a feeling he didn't quite know how to name. "Can we see you again?" Emma asked suddenly. Ethan looked at Jessica. She hesitated for a long moment. Then she let out a small sigh. "I'll think about it." Ethan nodded. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. The drive home. That night, as Ethan drove back to his penthouse, he realized his life had just changed forever. He had walked into that cafe as a billionaire, a businessman, a stranger. But he had left as something more. Maybe not a father. Not yet. But he was on his way. And for the first time in years, he finally felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. A home beyond wealth. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. At first, Jessica kept him at arm's length, watching his every move with the cautious eye of a mother who had been let down too many times. But the children, they were curious. They wanted to know more about the man who had suddenly appeared in their lives, the man who looked like them, but felt like a stranger. And Ethan, he found himself wanting to know them too. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing business deals or financial gains. He was chasing moments. The way Emma's eyes lit up when she talked about art. The way the twins whispered in their secret language, laughing at jokes only they understood. The way the youngest boy, Leo, slowly started holding Ethan's hand when they walked together. It was slow. It was messy. But it was real. A father without a name. One evening, as they sat in a park watching the sunset, Leo turned to Ethan and asked, "What should we call you?" Jessica stiffened beside him. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. He had never expected to hear that question. "You can call me whatever you want," he said carefully. The twins exchanged glances, whispering between themselves. Emma, the oldest, was the first to speak. "Mom says you're not our dad," she said softly. Ethan glanced at Jessica, who was looking away, her expression unreadable. "She's right," Ethan admitted. "I wasn't there when you were born. I didn't help you take your first steps. I didn't put you to bed at night." Emma studied him. "But you're here now." Ethan swallowed. "Yeah," he said. "I am." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Leo reached out and took Ethan's hand. "Okay," he said simply. "Then you're just Ethan." Ethan let out a quiet breath. For now, that was enough. A decision that changed everything. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Jessica and Ethan sat in the small kitchen of her apartment. Jessica ran a hand through her hair, exhaling. "I never expected this," she admitted. Ethan chuckled. "Neither did I." She looked up at him, her gaze softer than before. "But they love you," she said. "And I can see that you love them too." Ethan didn't hesitate. "I do." Jessica hesitated. "I don't want them to get hurt," she whispered. Ethan reached for her hand, his voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere." Jessica looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. The first time, they called him Dad. Months passed. Seasons changed. And little by little, they became a family. One day, as Ethan was tying Leo's shoelaces before a trip to the park, the boy grinned up at him and said, "Hurry up, Dad." Ethan froze. Jessica, standing nearby, looked at him sharply. The twins giggled, watching his reaction. Emma, always the leader, shrugged and said, "Well, you are." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He looked up at Jessica, who gave him a small, knowing smile. And just like that, he knew. Money, success, power, none of it had ever given him the feeling he had in that moment. This was everything. The man who built a home. Years later, people would ask Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire tech genius, what his greatest investment had been. Was it his company? His real estate empire? His high-powered deals? He would just smile and say, "My greatest investment It wasn't in stocks or technology. It was in 4 little hearts that taught me what life was really about. And he never regretted it for a single moment. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.